Some stories arrive when we least expect them, but need them most. This one found me through the quiet courage of a Kansas widow in 1887, a woman who stood alone against debt, grief, and the weight of a community's judgment. It is not a tale of grand adventure, but of something rarer kindness returned across the years, and the courage it takes to let someone help when pride says otherwise. I share it now for those who understand that life's truest riches are measured not in gold coins, but in the debts of the heart we carry and repay. The numbers would not change. Clara Thornton pressed her knuckles against the kitchen table until the bones ached white. $847. She had counted the figures in Henry's ledger 6 times since lighting the coal oil lamp at 4 in the morning. Outside, Kansas stretched flat and silent under a sky just beginning to pale. Inside, the smell of cold coffee and dried ink. The letter from First National lay open beside the ledger. Mr. Garrett will arrive Tuesday next. 4 days. She folded the paper with hands that refused to tremble, she would not permit trembling, and placed it in the drawer beside Henry's pocket watch. The watch had stopped at 4:47. The exact minute they brought her the news about the wagon accident. 8 months passed. She had not wound it since. Clara pushed back from the table. The chair scraped loud against wooden floorboards. She walked to the window where dawn bled orange across the horizon, across 17 years of marriage, across land that would belong to strangers before the week was done. She did not cry. She counted cattle instead, 12 head. Down from 40 when Henry was alive. If this story finds you on a quiet morning with your own cup of coffee nearby, I would be honored to know where you are reading from. As my grandmother used to say, a story shared is a burden halved. Sometimes knowing we are not alone in our kitchens makes all the difference. The fence post would not move. Clara braced her boots against the dry Kansas earth and pulled. The locust wood, weathered gray from seasons she had stopped counting, held fast in its hole. Sweat ran down her temple and dripped onto the cracked ground. The August sun pressed against her back like a hand pushing her toward the dirt. She released the post, stepped back. Her shoulders burned from the effort, and somewhere behind her ribs, something tighter than muscle refused to loosen. A wagon rattled past on the road. The Hendersons. Clara did not turn around. She heard the wheels slow, then speed up again without stopping. The sound of not stopping had become familiar these past months. She gripped the post again. This time her hand slipped. She stumbled, caught herself, stood with her palms pressed against her thighs and her breath coming harder than the work deserved. 12 head of cattle grazed in the south pasture. She could see them from here, dark shapes against the brown grass. Henry had kept 40. Henry had known how to talk to the livestock buyers, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to lift a fence post with one clean motion. Henry was 8 months in the ground. Clara wiped her hands on her faded blue dress and looked toward the road where the Hendersons had disappeared. Dust hung in the air, slow to settle. But there was more dust now. A second cloud, rising from the opposite direction. She shaded her eyes. One rider, pushing hard. The horse moved with purpose. Not panic, someone who knew where he was going and meant to get there fast. Too early for Mr. Garrett. Wrong direction for town. The rider grew larger against the white sky. A man, sitting tall in the saddle. Flat-crowned hat pulled low. Something in the set of his shoulders spoke of distance traveled, of weeks on the trail. Clara's hand found the fence post again. Not to pull this time. To steady. The horse slowed as it reached her gate. Dust swirled and settled on her boots, her hem, her cracked lips. The man swung down from the saddle, removed his hat. Young, 30, maybe a year or two more. Sun-darkened skin and eyes that moved across her face like he was searching for something he had lost years ago. Mrs. Thornton. Not a question. He knew her name. She had never seen him before in her life. Who are you? Samuel Decker, ma'am. Who are you? Samuel Decker, ma'am. He held his hat against his chest, turning the brim slowly between calloused fingers. I knew your husband. Long time back. The name meant nothing. Clara searched his face, the sun-darkened skin. The lines around his eyes. Too deep for his age. The way he stood with his weight balanced like a man used to moving fast when needed. Henry had known many people, cattlemen, traders, drifters passing through. She could not remember them all. Mr. Thornton passed 8 months ago, she said. The words came out flat, practiced from too many repetitions. Yes, ma'am. I heard in Dodge City. Samuel glanced toward the house, then back to her. I rode hard when I heard the bank was circling. 4 days to get here. If you could spare some water, I'd be grateful. And there's something I need to show you. Clara looked at the horse. A lineback dun, well-muscled, trail-worn but not mistreated. The kind of animal a man with means would ride. The saddlebags hung heavy on both sides. Water's in the well, she said. Dipper's on the hook. She watched him lead the horse to the trough. His movements were efficient, no wasted motion. He let the animal drink, then pulled water for himself, tilting his head back to let it run down his throat. When he finished, he wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and looked at her again. Inside, Clara said. Whatever you have to show me, I'd rather see it out of this sun. The kitchen still smelled of cold coffee and the coal oil from her morning vigil with the ledger. Clara pulled out a chair and sat. Samuel remained standing, reaching into his vest pocket. Yardoom. He produced an envelope. The paper had gone soft at the edges, worn from years of handling. He set it on the table between them. 13 years ago, he said. I was 19. Hired on with a cattle drive heading north from Texas. Bad outfit. The trail boss abandoned us 2 weeks in, took the payroll and the good horses. 3 of us were left. The other 2 decided to push on. I stayed with the herd. Clara looked at the envelope. She did not touch it. Fever hit me the 2nd week alone. I don't remember much after that. When I woke up, I was in a bed I didn't recognize, and a man I'd never seen was spooning broth into my mouth. Samuel's fingers pressed against the table edge. Henry Thornton. He found me collapsed by his fence line, brought me into his home, nursed me 6 weeks until I could stand on my own 2 feet. Clara's throat tightened. She remembered that summer. Henry had come home one evening talking about a young man he had found, half dead from fever, raving about cattle and debts. She had been pregnant then, with the child they would lose that winter. The memory sat in her chest like a stone she had swallowed long ago. When I was strong enough to leave, Samuel continued, he gave me his own boots. Mine had rotted through. He said a man can't walk into his future barefoot. He pushed the envelope toward her. Open it. Clara's hands moved before she could decide whether she wanted them to. The paper was soft, almost fragile, inside a folded map drawn in ink that had faded to brown, and 5 $10 bills, creased but uncirculated. $50, Samuel said. He pressed it into my hand the morning I left, told me it was a loan, not charity, told me to pay it back when I could. Clara unfolded the map. Henry's handwriting, she would know it anywhere. The sharp angles of his letters, the way he crossed his T's with a single decisive stroke. A route from their farm to Abilene, with distances marked and water sources noted. In the corner, smaller than the rest, go toward the sunset. Son, don't look back. Her fingers traced the words. Henry had written those words to a stranger. He had called this boy son. I never spent the money, Samuel said. I kept it, all of it. Told myself I'd bring it back one day, when I had something to show for what he gave me. Clara looked up. The light through the window caught the dust motes floating between them. I own 40 head now, Samuel said. Built it from nothing. Every year I thought about coming back. Every year I told myself next season. Then I heard he was gone, and I stopped making excuses. He reached into his vest again. This time he pulled out a worn leather pouch and set it on the table with a sound that made Clara's breath catch the heavy clink of gold. I came to pay my debt, Mrs. Thornton. Clara stared at the pouch, at the map, at the $50 that had never been spent. The bank, she heard herself say. Mr. Garrett is coming Tuesday? Samuel nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. I know. The whole county knows. He leaned forward, and for the first time, his voice carried something beyond simple respect. How much do you owe? The number sat in her mouth like ash. $847. Samuel did not flinch. He did not look away. He untied the leather pouch and upended it onto the table. Gold coins spilled across the worn wood, catching the light from the window, rolling and settling against the ledger that had kept Clara awake since before dawn. Double eagles, mostly. A few smaller pieces. More money than she had seen in one place since before Henry died, since before the drought, since before everything went wrong. Count it, he said. Clara's hands would not move. The gold sat there, warm from his pocket, glinting against the dark grain of the table. Why? The word came out broken. Samuel picked up the map, looked at Henry's handwriting, and set it down again. Because he called me son, and a son pays his debts. Outside, a wagon rattled past on the road. Clara turned toward the window. The Hendersons again, or someone else heading toward town with stories to tell. The gold on her table. The stranger who had brought it, Tuesday, 3 days away. And the question she had not yet asked, what would this man want in return? Clara did not touch the gold. She sat with her hands flat on the table, palms pressed against the worn wood as if the kitchen might tilt and spill her onto the floor. The coins gleamed between them, catching the afternoon light that slanted through the window. She counted them with her eyes. Double eagles. Mostly. A few smaller pieces. More than enough. I can't accept this, she said. Samuel leaned back in his chair. He had not sat until she gestured for him to, and even now he held himself like a man ready to stand at any moment. It ain't charity, Mrs. Thornton. It's a debt. Your husband gave me $50 in 6 weeks of his life. Everything I built started from that. That was Henry's choice, not mine. No, ma'am. But the bank coming Tuesday, that's not your choice either. Clara's jaw tightened. She looked at the map still spread on the table. At Henry's handwriting directing a stranger toward a future he would never see. Go toward the sunset. Son, don't look back. What do you want? She asked. Men don't ride 4 days to hand over gold without wanting something. Samuel nodded slowly, as if he had expected the question. I know cattle. Spent 13 years learning the business from the ground up. I've got 40 head of my own now. Contracts with buyers in Kansas City and Denver. What I don't have is land. Clara's fingers curled against the table. You want my land. I want to use your land. There's a difference. He reached into his vest and pulled out a folded paper, setting it beside the gold. 20% of profits for 5 years. I provide the labor and the additional stock. You provide the pasture and the infrastructure. At the end of 5 years, we renegotiate or part ways. Your choice. She did not pick up the paper. And the debt to the bank. Paid, regardless of whether you agree to the rest. I didn't come here to make a deal. Mrs. Thornton. I came to pay back what I owe. The business proposal is separate. The kitchen fell quiet. Outside, Clara could hear Samuel's horse shifting at the trough, the creak of leather, the buzz of flies in the August heat. The gold sat on her table like an accusation, like a promise, like both at once. Show me the barn, she said. Samuel followed her across the yard without speaking. The afternoon sun bore down on them, and Clara felt the sweat gathering at the small of her back, dampening the fabric of her faded dress. She had not walked this path with anyone since Henry died. The distance between the house and the barn had never seemed so long. She pushed open the doors. The smell hit her first hay and dust and the faint sweetness of old manure, the smell of work that had been Henry's and was now hers alone. Light slanted through gaps in the roof, illuminating motes that swirled in the disturbed air. He built this himself, Clara said. Took him 3 summers, cut every beam from timber he hauled down from the hills. Samuel walked the length of the barn, his boots quiet on the packed earth floor. He ran his hand along a support post, examined the joinery where beam met beam. His fingers found a repair, a newer piece of wood spliced into an older one, the color not quite matching. This your work? He asked. Clara nodded. Last spring, the original piece rotted through. He crouched down, looked at the joint from below. Good repair. Solid. It holds. Samuel stood and continued his inspection. He checked the stalls, the feed bins, the tack hanging on the walls. When he reached the far corner, he stopped and looked up at the roof. Light poured through a gap where shingles had blown away. How long has that been leaking? Since March. He turned to face her. How have you managed 8 months alone, with a leak in your barn and a debt to the bank and 12 head where there should be 40? Clara's spine straightened. The words came out harder than she intended, sharpened by months of silence and solitude. I managed by not expecting help and not accepting pity. Samuel did not flinch. He did not look away. He stood in the shaft of light from the damaged roof, dust motes swirling around him, and nodded once. I ain't offering either, ma'am. I'm trading labor for a share. If that offends you, I'll leave the money and go. You can pay off Mr. Garrett and never see me again. Clara looked at him, really looked, for the first time since he had ridden into her yard. The lines around his eyes, the calluses on his hands, the way he stood, balanced and ready. A man who had learned to expect nothing and earn everything. Henry had seen something in this boy 13 years ago, something worth saving. "The barn roof needs fixing," she said. "So does the fence in the south pasture. The well pump sticks when the weather turns. And I've got 12 head that need to become 30 before winter if I'm going to have anything worth selling come spring." Samuel waited. "You sleep in the barn. Side door has a latch. 5 in the morning. You start on the roof." Clara turned and walked toward the barn doors, then stopped with her hand on the frame. She did not look back. "We'll see how you work before I sign any papers." "Yes, ma'am." She walked out into the sunlight. Behind her, she heard Samuel moving through the barn, his footsteps measured and deliberate. She did not wait for him. She walked back to the house, climbed the porch steps, and stood in the doorway looking at the gold still spread across her kitchen table. Tuesday was 3 days away. Mr. Garrett would arrive with his papers and his witnesses, expecting to find a widow ready to surrender, expecting to take Henry's land and add it to the bank's ledger like another number in a column. Clara gathered the coins, one by one, feeling the weight of each piece in her palm. She placed them back in the leather pouch and pulled the drawstring tight. 3 days. She walked to the window and looked out at the barn. Samuel had climbed onto the roof and was examining the damage, silhouetted against the white sky. He moved with the confidence of a man who knew what he was doing, checking the beams, testing the remaining shingles, measuring the gap with his hands. But confidence was not the same as trust. And trust was something Clara had buried with her husband 8 months ago. The pouch sat heavy in her hands, heavy with gold, heavy with questions she could not yet answer. What kind of man rides 4 days to repay a debt 13 years old? And what happens when the debt is paid and he has no reason left to stay? 2 weeks changed the shape of Clara's days. She woke now to the sound of Samuel's boots crossing the yard at first light, the creak of the barn door, the low murmur of his voice speaking to the horses. By the time she had the coffee boiling, he was already on the fence line or finishing the barn roof, working in the cool hours before the August sun turned brutal. They had found a rhythm. Not comfortable. Clara did not allow herself comfort, but functional. He worked. She worked. They crossed paths at the well, at the barn, at the gate to the south pasture. Words stayed practical. The post by the creek needs replacing. Storm coming from the west. Cattle moved to the north section. Nothing more. Nothing less. This morning Clara sat in the shade of the porch with a bridle spread across her lap. The leather had cracked along the cheek piece, and she worked neat's foot oil into the grain with a rag. Her fingers finding the familiar grooves worn smooth by years of use. Henry's bridle. Henry's horse was gone now, sold to pay for seed that never sprouted. But the tack remained. She watched Samuel through the heat shimmer rising off the yard. He had stripped to his undershirt, suspenders hanging loose at his hips, sweat darkening the fabric between his shoulder blades. The fence post that had defeated her 2 weeks ago stood straight and solid now, anchored by his labor. He stopped at 11. He always stopped at 11. Clara set aside the bridle and walked to the well. She drew a bucket before he reached the yard, hung the dipper on its hook, and returned to her work without waiting. When she looked up again, he was drinking, head tilted back, water running down his chin and throat. He hung the dipper back in its place, wiped his mouth, and returned to the fence. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. The cattle buyer came at midday. Clara saw the wagon before Samuel did. She had learned to read the roads, to know the difference between neighbors passing through and strangers with purpose. This wagon moved slowly, deliberately. the driver scanning the pastures with the calculating eye of a man who counted value in pounds and pennies. She stood from the porch and smoothed her dress. The fabric was still faded, still mended at the elbows, but she had washed it yesterday and pressed it with the heavy iron that Henry used to joke would build muscle in her arms. Samuel appeared at the corner of the barn. He had pulled his shirt back on, though it hung open at the collar. His eyes moved from Clara to the approaching wagon and back again. "You want me to handle this?" he asked. "No." She walked to the gate and waited. The buyer was a thick man with a beard that needed trimming and a hat that had seen better decades. He pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down with the grunt of someone whose knees had started to protest such movements. "Mrs. Thornton?" He touched his hat brim. "Name's Calder. I buy cattle for the Kansas City stockyards. Heard you might have some head to sell." "You heard right." Clara gestured toward the south pasture. 12 head. Good stock. Henry Thornton bred them from Missouri bloodlines. Calder squinted at the distant shapes of the cattle. 12 ain't much of a herd. 12 is what I have. Samuel had moved closer, but he stayed behind Clara, near the fence, silent, watching. Calder pulled a small tally book from his vest and licked the tip of his pencil. "I can offer $8 a head. That's fair for the current market." "The current market in Dodge City is 11, Clara said. "I read the dispatches same as anyone." Calder's pencil stopped moving. He looked at her, really looked, for the first time since climbing down from his wagon. Clara held his gaze without blinking. "11's the price at the yards," he said. "I've got transport costs. Feed along the way, risk of loss. $10 a head? You're getting healthy cattle that won't lose weight on the drive? Your risk is minimal, and we both know it." The pencil tapped against the tally book. Calder glanced at Samuel, perhaps expecting support for a lower offer. Some masculine solidarity against a widow's demands. Samuel's face showed nothing somehow. His arms stayed crossed over his chest. $9.50, Calder said. 10. A long pause. The cattle lowed in the distance. A fly buzzed between them, circling Calder's hat before veering away. $10, Calder said. "I'll be back Thursday with a crew to drive them out." Clara nodded once. "Payment on delivery? Gold or banknotes?" "Banknotes." "Acceptable." Calder wrote something in his tally book, tore out the page, and handed it to her. A receipt, with the terms scratched in his cramped handwriting. Clara folded it and placed it in her pocket without reading it. "Thursday. Then," Calder said. He climbed back onto his wagon, turned the horses, and rattled away down the road. Clara watched until the dust settled. When she turned around, Samuel was standing closer than she expected, close enough that she could see the sweat still drying on his forehead and the faint lines at the corners of his eyes. He extended his hand, not to shake on a deal, but the way a man offers respect to an equal. "Fair dealing, Mrs. Thornton." She took his hand. His palm was rough, calloused, warm from the sun. She released it after a single shake and walked back toward the house. "Supper's at 6, she said, without turning around. "On the porch. I reckon I made enough for 2. The biscuits came out golden, the way Henry had liked them. Clara set the table on the porch, 2 plates, 2 forks, 2 glasses of water from the well. The bacon had cooked in the cast-iron skillet until the edges crisped, and the beans had simmered with molasses and salt pork since morning. Samuel appeared at 6 exactly. He had washed at the pump, his hair still damp, His shirt changed for a cleaner one. He hesitated at the bottom of the porch steps. "Sit," Clara said. He sat. They ate in the comfortable silence of people who have run out of the need for unnecessary words. The sun dropped toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The heat of the day began to loosen its grip. "Henry taught you to negotiate," Samuel said. It was not a question. "Henry taught me everything about this place." Clara set down her fork. "I just didn't know I was learning at the time." Samuel nodded. He looked out at the pasture, at the cattle moving slowly toward the water trough, at the fence line he had spent 2 weeks repairing. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped, gone quiet in a way Clara had not heard before. "He told me something once. That summer, when I was getting better. I've thought about it mighty near every day since." Samuel turned his glass in his hands, watching the water catch the fading light. He said, "The worth of a man ain't what he owns, it's what he'd give away." Clara's hand stopped halfway to her mouth. The biscuit she had been reaching for remained untouched. "He never said that to me." Samuel looked at his plate. "Some things a man only says to strangers. Ma'am, easier that way." The words hung between them. Clara thought of all the things Henry had told her, practical things, loving things, the 1,000 small observations of 17 years of marriage. But this she had never heard. She picked up her fork, speared a piece of bacon from her plate, and dropped it onto Samuel's. He looked up. "Eat," she said. "You've got fence to finish tomorrow." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close. He ate the bacon without comment. The sun continued its descent. The whale oil lamp on the porch rail flickered to life as Clara struck a match. In its glow, the two of them sat with their plates empty and their glasses half full, listening to the cattle settle and the crickets begin their evening chorus. Then, from the south, a glow on the horizon, too bright for sunset, too orange for starlight. Clara stood. Her chair scraped against the porch boards. Fire, grass fire, moving fast across the dry prairie, headed straight for the south pasture, and her cattle were directly in its path. Samuel was already running. Clara watched him clear the porch steps in a single bound, his boots hitting the packed earth of the yard as he sprinted toward the barn. She stood frozen for one heartbeat, two. Her eyes fixed on the orange glow spreading across the southern horizon. The glow pulsed and shifted, alive in a way that made her stomach clench. Then her legs moved. She ran to the well and grabbed the bucket. Water sloshed over the rim as she hauled it up, soaking her dress, her hands, the ground at her feet. She looked around for the burlap sacks she kept in the shed there, hanging on the nail by the door. She snatched them down, plunged them into the bucket, wrung them until her arms burned. The smell reached her before the sound. Smoke, acrid and thick, carried on the wind that had shifted east, dry grass and sage, and something darker underneath. The smell of a season's worth of growth turning to ash. Samuel emerged from the barn on his horse, the line back done, moving fast toward the south pasture. He did not look back. He did not need to. Clara knew what he was doing. The cattle had to be moved north, away from the fire's path, before the flames cut off their escape. She grabbed the shovel from the porch, the ash-handled one Henry had used, worn smooth from years of grip, and ran toward the fire line. The heat hit her at 50 yards. Clara stopped, gasping. The air shimmered and twisted, distorting the shapes of the flames that crawled across the dry grass. Orange and yellow tongues licked at the darkness, throwing sparks into the sky that rose and swirled and fell again, starting new fires wherever they landed. She pressed the wet burlap against her face and pushed forward. The ground beneath her feet changed from hard-packed dirt to grass, from grass to stubble, from stubble to smoldering black. Smoke stung her eyes, blurred her vision. She swung the shovel, cutting a line in the earth, throwing dirt onto the flames. The fire hissed and spat where the soil landed, died for a moment, then crept around her efforts and continued its march. Clara beat at the ground with the wet sack. The burlap steamed and dried almost instantly, losing its protection. She needed more water. But the bucket was back at the well, too far to reach. She beat harder, faster, her arms screaming, her lungs filling with smoke that tasted like the end of everything. A cow bellowed somewhere to her right. The sound cut through the roar of the flames, panicked, desperate. Clara turned, trying to see through the smoke. Shapes moved in the darkness beyond the fire line. Samuel's voice, shouting commands she could not understand. The thunder of hooves on dry ground. She kept digging, kept beating, kept fighting. The fire pushed back. Flames jumped the trench she had cut, catching in a patch of tall grass she had not reached. Clara stumbled backward, shielding her face with her arm. The heat singed the hair on her forearms. Her dress was ruined. She could feel it, the fabric stiff and brittle where sparks had landed and burned through to her skin. She did not stop. Time lost meaning in the smoke and the roar. Clara's world narrowed to the shovel in her hands, the ground beneath her feet, the flames that would not quit. Her shoulders burned, her back burned. Her eyes streamed tears that evaporated before they reached her cheeks. Her body was not young anymore. 47 years of living protested with every swing of the shovel, but she ignored it. She had ignored worse. Then Samuel was beside her. He appeared out of the smoke, like something conjured, his face blackened, his shirt torn at the shoulder. He carried a shovel of his own. Where had he found it? And fell into rhythm beside her without a word. Dig. Throw. Beat. Dig. Throw. Beat. They worked shoulder to shoulder in the hellish glow. The fire pushed, they pushed back. Clara could hear Samuel's breath, ragged and harsh, matching her own. Could feel the heat of his body next to hers separate from the heat of the flames. Could smell the sweat and smoke, and something underneath that was simply him. Simply human. Simply alive. The wind shifted. Clara felt at first a cooling on the back of her neck, a change in the way the smoke moved. The flames hesitated, uncertain, then began to bend away from them. East instead of north. Away from the house. Away from what remained of the pasture. Samuel did not stop digging. Neither did Clara. They widened the firebreak, throwing dirt and beating embers, until the flames had nothing left to catch and began to die against the bare earth and the creek bed that formed a natural barrier to the east. The roar faded to a crackle. The crackle faded to a hiss. The hiss faded to silence. Clara's shovel slipped from her fingers. She stood in the middle of the blackened ground, her chest heaving, her dress destroyed, her face streaked with soot and sweat and tears she did not remember crying. Around her, 7 acres of pasture had turned to ash. The smell would linger for days, maybe weeks, but beyond the burn line, grass still stood, Cattle moved in the darkness, their shapes visible against the stars that had emerged while she fought. 12 head, all 12. Clara's knees buckled. She sat down in the ash without meaning to, her legs simply refusing to hold her anymore. The ground was warm beneath her, still radiating the heat of the fire that had tried to take everything. She looked at her hands blackened, blistered in places where the shovel had rubbed through skin, trembling. Samuel sat down beside her, not close, not touching, just there, in the ash, his own hands as black as hers. He did not speak, did not move, just breathed. The sound loud in the sudden quiet. The stars wheeled overhead. The smoke drifted east, carrying the last of the fire's anger with it. Somewhere in the pasture, a cow lowed, not panicked now, just calling to the others, making sure they were still there. Clara watched the stars. Her throat was raw, scraped clean by smoke and heat. When she finally spoke, the words came out broken. "You could have run." Samuel picked up a blade of burned grass, blackened and brittle. He rolled it between his fingers, watching it crumble to dust. "So could you, ma'am?" Clara looked at her hands again, then at his. Both black, both blistered, both still shaking from the effort of what they had done. Somewhere in the night, something had shifted. She could feel it the same way she had felt the wind change. The same way she had felt the fire finally surrender. The business arrangement they had built over 2 weeks of careful distance had burned away with the grass. What remained was something older, simpler. 2 people who had chosen to stay. Clara stood. Her legs protested, Lord. How they protested, but she ignored them. She brushed ash from her ruined dress, knowing it was pointless, doing it anyway. The motion gave her hands something to do while she found the words. 5 a.m, she said. "You fixed the fence." Samuel looked up at her. The firelight had died, but starlight caught the planes of his face, the soot-streaked skin, the lines around his eyes that seemed deeper now than they had at supper. He nodded. Did not smile. But something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but closer than she had seen before. "Yes, ma'am." Clara walked back toward the house. Her boots crunched on burned ground, then on grass, then on the hard-packed earth of the yard. The well stood waiting, the bucket, the house with its dark windows and its empty rooms, and Henry's watch still stopped in the drawer. She did not look back, but she heard Samuel's footsteps behind her, heading toward the barn. Heard the creak of the door, the sound of his boots on the wooden floor inside. Heard the settling of a man who was not leaving. In the kitchen. She lit the coal oil lamp with hands that still would not stop trembling. The gold coins sat in their pouch on the shelf. The partnership papers lay unsigned on the table. Calder was coming Thursday for the cattle that had survived. All 12 of them. Because a man who owed her nothing had ridden into the fire instead of away from it. Clara sank into the chair by the window. Through the glass, she could see the black smear of the burned pasture, the faint glow of embers still dying in the distance. And beyond that, barely visible in the darkness, the road that led to town, the road the whole county would travel come morning, when word spread about the fire on the Thornton place and the young cowboy who had stayed to fight it. The wagon rattled toward town under a sky the color of old bone. Clara sat on the buckboard seat with her hands folded in her lap, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, The blisters on her palms had begun to heal new pink skin that still pulled when she gripped too hard, but the rawness in her throat lingered. A week since the fire, and her voice still came out hoarse if she spoke too long. Samuel held the reins beside her, guiding the horse with small movements that spoke of years of practice. Neither had spoken since leaving the farm. The burned pasture still smoldered in places, sending thin columns of smoke into the August air. Calder had come Thursday as promised, counted the cattle, paid in banknotes that now sat folded in Clara's pocket. $120. Enough to buy supplies for the winter. Enough to prove that the farm could still produce something of value. Not enough to silence the whispers that started before they even reached the general store. Clara heard them first, voices pitched low, but not low enough. Carrying across the dusty street as she climbed down from the wagon, two women stood on the porch of the milliner's shop, their heads bent together, their eyes tracking Clara's movements. The widow and that young cowboy, living out there together, just the two of them. Henry not even cold in the ground. No shame at all, if you ask me. Clara's spine went rigid. She kept walking, her boots raising small clouds of dust with each step. Samuel fell into step beside her, his face carefully blank. He had heard. She knew he had heard. But he said nothing, and she was grateful for that small mercy. The general store smelled of coffee beans and leather, and the faint sweetness of hard candy in glass jars. Paulson stood behind the counter, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose, his expression neutral in the way of men who made their living selling to everyone regardless of reputation. "Mrs. Thornton?" He nodded. "Mr. Decker?" "Mr. Paulson." Clara placed her list on the counter. "Flour, salt, coffee, lamp oil." She read the items without looking up, without acknowledging the other customers who had fallen silent at her entrance. Mrs. Henderson stood by the fabric bolts, her hand frozen on a length of blue cotton. The postmaster's wife lingered near the canned goods, pretending to read labels she had read 100 times before. Mr. Paulson gathered the supplies. Clara counted out the money from Calder's payment. Exact change, no conversation. She was reaching for the packages when Samuel's voice cut through the silence. "And that bolt of calico, the rust-colored one." Clara's hand stopped in midair. Samuel pointed to the fabric shelf, where a bolt of rust and cream calico sat between the plain muslins and the expensive brocades. "For the curtains you mentioned, the ones in the kitchen." She had not mentioned any curtains. Mrs. Henderson's intake of breath was audible across the store. The postmaster's wife set down her can of peaches with a deliberate click. Clara turned to face Samuel. His expression was open, earnest, completely unaware of what he had just done. He was trying to be kind. He was trying to give her something pretty, something that was not born of necessity or survival. He did not understand that kindness. Here, in this store, in front of these women, was a weapon pointed at her throat. "I don't need charity, Mr. Decker." The words came out harder than she intended, harder than she felt. But she could not take them back, not with Mrs. Henderson watching, not with the postmaster's wife already composing the story she would tell at supper. Samuel's face changed. The openness closed, like a door swinging shut. His jaw tightened. He looked at the bolt of calico, then at Clara, then at the floor. "My mistake, ma'am." Clara gathered her packages. Her hands were steady. She would not allow them to be otherwise, but something in her chest had twisted. Tight and small and painful. She walked toward the door without looking at the other customers, without acknowledging the silence that followed her like a shadow. The porch steps were slick from the morning's rain. She did not see the mud until her foot was already sliding. The packages flew from her arms, flour, salt, coffee scattering across the wet boards. Her boots found no purchase on the slippery wood. She grabbed for the railing, missed, and fell. She landed hard on her hands and knees in the street. The mud was thick and cold, soaking through her dress, her stockings, her dignity. Brown water splashed across her face, into her mouth, tasting of dirt and horse droppings and humiliation. Behind her, someone laughed. A single, sharp sound, quickly stifled but not quickly enough. Clara knelt in the mud. Her palms stung where the gravel had torn open the new pink skin from the fire. Her dress, her good dress, the one she had worn to town because she still had pride, still had standards, was ruined. Coffee grounds floated in the puddle beside her, mixing with the salt that had spilled from its torn bag. She could not move. The laughter had stopped, but the silence was worse. She could feel them watching Mrs. Henderson, the postmaster's wife, Mr. Paulson in his doorway, the women from the milliner's shop who had called her shameless, all of them, staring at Clara Thornton on her hands and knees in the filth. Henry's widow. Look at her now. The thought came unbidden, and with it a wave of shame so thick she could taste it beneath the mud. 8 months of holding herself together. 8 months of refusing to bend. And here she was, kneeling in the street like a beggar, covered in muck, while the whole town watched and judged and found her wanting. Then Samuel was there. He did not speak. He did not offer platitudes or comfort. He simply stepped down into the mud beside her, his boots sinking into the same muck that soaked her dress, and held out his hand. Clara looked at the hand, looked at the mud on her palms, the cuts that were starting to bleed again, looked at the faces on the porch, the judgment in their eyes. She took his hand. Samuel pulled her up. His grip was firm, steady, without hesitation. He did not flinch at the mud that transferred from her fingers to his. He simply held on until she was standing, then released her and bent to gather what remained of her supplies. The flour was lost. The salt was mostly gone. But Samuel collected the coffee tin, the lamp oil, the small items that had survived the fall. He loaded them back into her arms without comment. Clara stood in the street covered in mud, her face burning with a heat that had nothing to do with the August sun. The watchers had not moved, had not offered to help, had simply stood and observed, adding this moment to the catalog of stories they would tell about Henry Thornton's widow and the young cowboy who lived on her farm. "The wagon," Samuel said. Just that. Nothing more. They walked back together. Clara climbed onto the seat, mud squelching beneath her, and Samuel took up the reins. The horse began to move. The town fell away behind them. 3 miles of silence. The calico bolt sat between them on the seat. Samuel must have bought it anyway. Must have paid for it while she was falling. While the town was watching her kneel in the dirt, it lay there now, rust and cream, beautiful and unwanted. Clara stared at the road ahead. Her dress was drying in the sun, the mud stiffening into a crust that would take hours to scrub clean. Her palms throbbed where the gravel had torn them open again. The taste of humiliation sat in her mouth like bile. "This is a business arrangement," she said. Samuel's hands tightened on the reins. "Yes, ma'am," It is—" But his voice had gone flat. His jaw was set. He did not look at her. She had hurt him. She knew she had hurt him. And the knowing made her want to hurt him more. Because hurting him was easier than explaining why the calico terrified her. Why his kindness felt like a betrayal of everything she had promised at Henry's grave. Henry would have liked him. The thought arrived unbidden, unwelcome, undeniable. Henry would have liked this man who worked without complaint, who faced fire without flinching, who bought fabric for curtains she had never mentioned because he had noticed her windows were bare. That thought frightened her more than the fire had. "Don't buy things for me again," Clara said. Her voice came out cold, controlled, nothing like the chaos inside her chest. Samuel was quiet for a long time. The wagon wheels turned, the road dust rose and settled on her mud-caked dress. "Yes, ma'am," he said at last, so quiet she barely heard. The calico stayed between them. Neither moved it. Neither spoke again. When they reached the farm, Samuel stopped the wagon by the porch. Clara climbed down without assistance, her ruined dress dragging in the dirt. She walked inside without looking back. Through the window, she watched him drive the wagon to the barn, watched him unhitch the horse, watched him carry the calico inside with the rest of the supplies, setting it on the shelf where she would see it every time she entered. Then she watched him walk to the barn, disappear inside, and close the door behind him. The latch clicked shut, and Clara stood alone in her kitchen, covered in dried mud, her hands bleeding through the bandages she had not yet changed, wondering if she had just destroyed the only good thing that had happened to her since Henry died. Clara did not sleep. She lay in the dark with her eyes open, listening to the silence of the house and the distant sounds from the barn. An owl called somewhere in the cottonwoods by the creek. The wind moved through the grass that had not burned. And beneath it all, the quiet that was worse than any noise, the quiet of a man who had stopped trying. Samuel had not come to the porch for supper. She had cooked anyway, force of habit, and left a plate by the barn door. When she checked at midnight, the plate sat untouched, the food cold and congealed in the summer air. She had done that. She had pushed him away because the women in town were watching, because the whispers cut deeper than she wanted to admit, because wanting something felt like betraying Henry, and she could not bear to want anything anymore. The ceiling above her bed was the same ceiling Henry had stared at during his last night home. He had complained about a water stain in the corner. "I'll fix that come spring," he had said. And then spring came and he was gone, and the stain had spread and she had not fixed it because fixing it meant admitting he was never coming back. Clara closed her eyes, opened them. The darkness remained the same. At first light, she heard movement in the yard. She went to the window without thinking, her bare feet cold on the wooden floor. Through the glass, she could see Samuel leading his horse from the barn. His saddlebags hung heavy on the animal's flanks. His bedroll was strapped behind the saddle. He was leaving. Clara's hand pressed flat against the window pane. The glass was cool beneath her palm, slightly fogged from her breath. She watched Samuel check the girth, adjust the stirrups, run his hand along the horse's neck the way a man does when he is saying goodbye to a place. He looked up at the house, just once. His eyes found her window, found her standing there in her nightdress with her hair unpinned and her hand against the glass. Then he turned back to his horse. She should go down. She should stop him. She should, but her feet would not move. Her voice would not come. She stood frozen at the window while the man who had saved her cattle, saved her land, saved her from the humiliation of Mr. Garrett's reckoning, prepared to ride out of her life because she had told him his kindness was unwelcome. Samuel mounted. The horse shifted beneath him. Eager to move, he gathered the reins. And still Clara stood at the window, paralyzed by something she could not name. He rode toward the gate. The morning sun caught the dust his horse raised, turning it golden in the early light. Clara watched him grow smaller, watched the distance between them widen with every step. Let him go. It's easier this way. No more whispers. No more watching eyes. No more wanting. Her hand slid down the glass. Henry would have liked him. The thought struck her like a physical blow. Henry, who had taken in a dying stranger and nursed him back to health. Henry, who had given away his boots and his money and his time to a boy he had never met before. Henry, who had written, "Go toward the sunset, son," on a map, and pressed $50 into a stranger's hand because that was who Henry was. That was the man she had married, and she had forgotten. She had forgotten that kindness was not weakness, that accepting help was not surrender, that the man riding away had learned generosity from her husband, had carried it with him for 13 years, and had brought it back to her when she needed it most. And she had thrown it in his face because the women in town might talk. Clara turned from the window. The drawer stuck when she pulled it. She yanked harder, and it came free with a screech of wood on wood. Inside the bank letter, now meaningless with the debt paid. Henry's watch, still stopped at 4:47, and something new, a folded paper that had not been there yesterday. She picked it up, unfolded it. Samuel's handwriting, cramped and careful, Mrs. Thornton. The night after the fire, you fell asleep at the kitchen table. I came to check on you and found you talking in your sleep. You were holding his watch. You said it stopped at 4:47 the minute they told you he was gone. You said you couldn't wind it because that would mean leaving him behind. I understand. I have a watch too, the one Mr. Thornton gave me when I left. Mine stopped at 4:47 as well. That was the hour I decided to live instead of lying down to die in that fever. I kept it stopped for years because I thought starting it again would mean forgetting what he did for me. I was wrong. Stopped things can start again. The question ain't whether time moves forward. It's whether we choose to move with it. The money is on the shelf. The partnership papers are unsigned on the table. The debt to the bank is paid regardless. I did not come here to make a deal. I came to honor a man who saved my life. If I have failed in that, I am sorry. Spawn. Clara read the letter twice. 3 times. Her hands were shaking. When had they started shaking? And the paper trembled between her fingers. She looked at the watch in the drawer. Silver case, tarnished now from months of neglect. The initials H engraved on the back in flowing script. She picked it up. The weight of it filled her palm, familiar and strange at the same time. 4:47. The hands had not moved since the day the sheriff came to her door with his hat in his hands and his eyes on the ground. She had told herself she was keeping the watch stopped out of love, out of loyalty, out of respect for the man who had worn it for 17 years of marriage. But standing in the gray morning light, holding Henry's watch in one hand and Samuel's letter in the other, Clara understood the truth. She had kept the watch stopped out of fear. Fear of moving forward. Fear of living without Henry. Fear of wanting anything, feeling anything, being anything other than the widow who maintained her husband's memory by refusing to let time continue. She had turned herself into a stopped watch, and she had tried to stop Samuel too, because his kindness reminded her that time was still passing, that life was still happening, that the world had not ended when Henry died, even though it felt like it should have. Clara set down the letter. She looked at the watch in her palm. Henry had given his boots to a stranger. His money? His time? His compassion? What had she given anyone since he died? Nothing. She had given nothing. She had hoarded her grief like a miser hoards gold, building walls around herself, pushing away anyone who might breach them. She had become so afraid of losing more that she had forgotten how to receive. And now Samuel was riding away, taking with him the only proof she had that Henry's kindness had mattered, that it had rippled outward into the world, and come back transformed into something she desperately needed. Clara's fingers found the crown of the watch, the small knob at the top that Henry had wound every morning before breakfast, a ritual so familiar she could hear the tiny clicks in her memory. She pulled the crown out. It resisted, stiff from disuse. She turned it. Once, twice, 3 times. She pushed it back in. The watch began to tick. The sound was small, barely audible, but it filled the kitchen like a thunderclap. Tick, tick, tick. Time moving, time continuing. Time refusing to stand still, no matter how much she wished it would. Clara pressed the watch against her chest. Her eyes burned, her throat closed, and then she was running. Out the door, across the porch, down the steps. Her bare feet hit the dirt of the yard, the sharp stones, the dried mud from yesterday's humiliation. She did not care. She ran toward the gate, toward the road, toward the figure on horseback who had almost reached the bend that would take him out of sight. Mr. Decker. Her voice cracked on his name. Her hair flew loose behind her, unpinned and wild. Her nightdress was not proper for running, for being seen, for anything except sleeping. And she did not care about that either. She did not think about the nightdress. She did not think about what the neighbors might say if they passed. She only knew that if she did not move now, she would spend the rest of her life regretting it. Samuel stopped, turned in the saddle. Clara reached the gate, gasping, her lungs burning from the sprint. She gripped the wooden post to steady herself, the same post she had failed to move 3 weeks ago. The same post he had fixed on his first day. In her other hand, the watch ticked against her palm, measuring out the seconds. "I don't know how to wind it," she said. The words came out broken, barely coherent. Henry always did it. Every morning. And when he died, I didn't. Her voice failed. The tears she had held back for 8 months spilled down her cheeks, hot and unstoppable. Samuel dismounted. He walked back to her slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel road. He stopped at the gate, close enough to touch, and looked at the watch in her hand. "You already wound it," he said. Clara looked down. The second hand moved in its tiny circle. Tick, tick, tick. "I did," she whispered. Samuel reached out, not for the watch for her hand. He folded her fingers closed around the silver case, holding them there for a moment. His palm was warm and rough against her knuckles. "Then you already know how." Clara looked up at him, at the lines around his eyes, at the road dust already settling on his clothes, at the patience in his face, the kindness that Henry had planted 13 years ago, still growing, still giving. "The roof still leaks," she said. Samuel's mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close. "I know." And the fence in the south pasture needs mending where the fire jumped it. And the cattle need to be checked before Calder sends his crew. And she stopped, swallowed, forced herself to say it. And I need help. I can't do this alone anymore. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. The watch ticked between them, counting seconds that had been lost and were now found. 5 a.m, he said. I'll start on the roof. Clara nodded. She released her grip on the gatepost. Her legs were trembling, her feet bleeding from the stones, her night dress completely inappropriate for standing in the road in full view of anyone who might pass. She did not care. Breakfast at 6, she said. I reckon I make enough for 2. Samuel walked back to his horse. He took the reins, but he did not mount. Instead, he led the animal back through the gate, back toward the barn, back to the life he had almost left behind. Clara watched him go. The watch ticked in her hand, steady and sure. Behind her, the sun rose over the burned pasture, over the land that was still hers, over the house where Henry's memory lived, alongside the possibility of something new. And for the first time in 8 months, Clara Thornton was not afraid of what came next. The rust-colored calico hung in Clara's kitchen window, catching the September morning light. She had sewn the curtains herself, 3 weeks ago, sitting on the porch with the fabric spread across her lap while Samuel mended the fence in the south pasture. Her stitches were not as even as her mother had taught her, but they held. The curtains framed the window like something intentional, something chosen, something that belonged. Clara stood at the stove now, cracking eggs into the cast-iron skillet. The bacon had already crisped, moved to a plate covered with a clean cloth to keep warm. Coffee bubbled in the pot that was never empty now. Always ready for 2 cups instead of 1. The kitchen smelled of breakfast and wood smoke and the particular warmth of a house that had remembered how to be lived in. The screen door creaked. Samuel stepped inside, his hat in his hands, his hair still damp from the pump. He had been up since 4, checking the cattle, preparing for the drive. 30 head now, he had brought 18 of his own to add to her 12. And together they had spent the past month building something neither could have managed alone. Coffee's ready, Clara said without turning. She heard him pour a cup, heard the scrape of the chair as he sat at the table. The same table where he had counted out gold coins 2 months ago. The same table where she had refused his kindness because she was afraid of what accepting it might mean. She carried the plates over, eggs, bacon, biscuits from the batch she had made before dawn. She set his plate in front of him and took her seat across the table. They ate in the comfortable silence of people who have run out of the need for unnecessary words. Samuel's fork scraped against the plate. Clara's coffee steamed in her cup. Outside, the cattle lowed in the pasture, restless with the instinct that told them today was different. Calder's buyer will meet us at the railhead, Samuel said. 3 days' drive, if the weather holds. Clara nodded. She had ridden the route in her mind a dozen times, tracing the path Henry had taken years ago when the herd was larger and the future seemed certain. She had not made the drive herself since before the wedding, when her father still ran cattle and she was young enough to sleep on the ground without her back protesting for days afterward. I packed provisions, she said. Salt pork, coffee, hardtack. Enough for a week if we need it. Samuel looked up from his plate. His eyes moved across her face, taking in something she could not name. You've done this before. A long time ago. Clara set down her fork. Before Henry, before the farm, before everything that came after. The morning light shifted through the calico curtains, painting rust-colored shadows on the table between them. Clara looked at the fabric, at the pattern she had studied so many times while sewing that she could see it with her eyes closed. "Thank you," she said. "For the curtains." Samuel's cup paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down slowly. "You made them yourself. You bought the fabric. When I told you not to," Clara met his eyes. "I was wrong to say that. I was wrong about a good many things." The words hung between them. Samuel did not rush to fill the silence. He waited, the way he always waited, with a patience that had stopped surprising her weeks ago. "Henry used to say that pride was the heaviest thing a person could carry." Clara's voice came out quieter than she intended. "I reckon I didn't understand what he meant until I watched you ride toward that gate. Until I realized I was about to let pride cost me the only good thing that had happened since he died." Samuel's hand rested on the table, inches from hers. He did not reach for her. He did not need to. "He saved my life," Samuel said. "Everything I have, everything I've built, it started with him. With this farm. With the kindness he showed a stranger who had nothing to offer in return." Clara looked at her plate, at the food she had made for 2 people instead of 1. "He never told me about you, about the fever, the boots, any of it. I didn't know until you showed me that map. Some things a man only tells strangers. You said that before." "It's still true." Samuel picked up his coffee cup, turned it slowly in his hands. "But I ain't a stranger anymore." "Am I?" Clara considered the question. The answer sat in the curtains on her window, in the meals she cooked for 2, in the rhythm they had built from the ashes of the fire and the mud of her humiliation. "No," she said. "You're not." The clock on the wall, Henry's clock, wound now every morning by Clara's own hand, chimed 7. Clara pushed back from the table and carried the plates to the basin. Behind her, she heard Samuel rise, heard him move toward the door. "I'll bring the horses around," he said. "The drive won't wait." She watched him go, through the window with its rust-colored curtains. She watched him cross the yard toward the barn, his stride easy and sure. A month ago, she had watched him ride toward the gate with his saddlebags packed, convinced she would never see him again. Now she watched him prepare for a journey they would take together. And the difference between those 2 mornings felt like the distance between drowning and breathing. Clara changed into her riding clothes, the split skirt she had not worn since Henry's death, practical canvas that allowed her to sit a horse properly. She pinned her hair beneath a wide-brimmed hat. In the mirror, a woman she almost recognized looked back at her. Not young, not old, somewhere in between, in the territory that had no name except the one she gave it. Ready. She walked outside into the September morning. The air had cooled overnight, carrying the first hint of autumn beneath the lingering warmth. Samuel waited by the gate with both horses saddled, the cattle already gathered in the road beyond, 30 head of good Kansas stock ready for the drive to the railhead. The road to town stretched out before them. Clara stopped at the edge of the yard. The same road where Mr. Garrett had traveled 2 months ago, bringing his papers and his witnesses. The same road where she had expected to sign away everything Henry had built. Garrett had come on that Tuesday, just as promised. He had brought the postmaster, the general store owner, Mrs. Henderson with her watching eyes and whispering mouth. He had spread his papers on the portable desk he carried for such occasions and read the amount owed in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. $847. And Samuel had stepped forward with the leather pouch of gold, counted it out coin by coin, and said words that Clara would remember until the day she died. "Mr. Thornton saved my life. His widow's home ain't for sale. Not today, not ever." The witnesses had watched in silence. Mrs. Henderson's mouth had opened and closed without sound. The postmaster had removed his hat and held it against his chest, as if attending a funeral in reverse, as if watching something dead come back to life. Now those same witnesses stood on the porch of the general store, watching Clara and Samuel prepare to ride out. Clara could see them from here, Mrs. Henderson. The postmaster's wife, the women from the milliner's shop who had laughed when she fell in the mud. Let them watch. Samuel held out his hand, not to help her mount, not to shake on a deal. He held out his hand the way a man offers something without words, without explanation, without expectation of return. Clara looked at his hand, calloused, sun-darkened, steady. She took it. His fingers closed around hers, warm and rough and certain. She held on longer than necessary, longer than practical, long enough for the witnesses to see and draw their own conclusions. "Partners?" Samuel asked. Clara released his hand. She gathered her reins, settled into the saddle, felt the familiar shift of the horse beneath her. "Clara," she said. Samuel went still. His eyes found hers across the space between their horses. "Clara, then—" His voice had dropped, gone soft in a way she had not heard before. "Partners." They rode out together. The cattle moved ahead of them, a river of brown and black flowing down the road toward town, toward the railhead, toward a future neither of them had planned. Clara sat tall in the saddle, her back straight, her hands easy on the reins. Samuel rode beside her, matching her pace, close enough that their stirrups nearly touched. The witnesses watched from the general store porch. Clara felt their eyes on her as she passed the weight of their curiosity, their slow revision of the stories they had told about Henry Thornton's widow. The postmaster turned to the general store owner, his voice carried across the morning air, not quite a whisper, not quite meant to be heard. "Henry Thornton's widow." Still standing. The store owner nodded slowly. "More than standing now, I'd say." Mrs. Henderson said nothing, but her eyes followed Clara down the road, and something in her expression had shifted. Not respect, not yet, but the beginning of understanding. Clara did not look back. She looked ahead, at the road unspooling before her, at the cattle moving steady and sure, at the horizon where the sky met the land in a line that stretched on forever. Samuel rode beside her. The morning sun caught the dust their horses raised, turning it golden. The calico curtains hung in her kitchen window back home, rust and cream, visible until the road curved and the farm disappeared behind the first low hill. Henry's watch ticked in Clara's pocket, keeping time that had started again 2 months ago in a moment of desperate courage. She thought of him now, not with the paralysis of grief, but with the quiet certainty of memory. He had saved a stranger. That stranger had become a man. That man had saved her. The debt was paid. The circle was closed. And something new had begun. Clara touched her pocket where the watch rested against her hip. Still ticking, still moving forward. The road stretched out before them, wide and long and full of nothing but possibility. Behind them, The town grew smaller. Ahead of them, 3 days of driving and a future they would build together. One fence post and one cattle drive, and one morning at a time. She looked at Samuel. He looked back at her. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. There is something quiet that stays with us after a story like this. Something that settles in the chest and does not ask to be named. Perhaps it feels familiar, the weight of holding on too long, the ache of letting go too late, the slow surprise of finding that time can begin again, even when we thought it had stopped forever. Many of us have stood at windows watching someone leave. Many of us have kept things frozen because moving forward felt like forgetting. Some of us have pushed away kindness not because we did not want it, but because wanting felt like betraying something we once loved. It is all right if this story did not resolve everything it stirred. Some feelings are not meant to be understood tonight. They are allowed to rest, unfinished. The way a stopped watch sits in a drawer until someone decides to wind it again. We do not always need answers. Sometimes we only need to know that others have walked this same road, felt this same weight, and found their way through. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for carrying Clara and Samuel with you, even for just a little while.